The House of the Wolfings. Chapter 15. They hear tell of the battle on the ridge. Ye have heard how the Dalings were appointed to go to help Theodulf in driving the folkspear home to the heart of the Roman host. So they went. But 6 hours thereafter comes one to Otter bidding him send a great part of the kindreds to him, for that he had had tidings that a great host of Romans were drawing near the wood edge, but were not entered therein, and that fain would he meet them in the open field. So the kindreds drew lots, and the lot fell first to the Elkerings, who are a great company, as ye know, and then to the Hardings, the Beamings, the Alftings, the Vallings, also a great company, the Galtings, and they no lesser, each in their turn, and last of all to the Laxings. And the Osselings prayed to go with the Elkerings, and this Otter deemed good, whereas a many of them be bowmen. All these then to the number of 1,000 or more entered the wood. And I was with them, for in sooth I was the messenger. No delay made we in the wood, nor went we over warily, trusting to the warding of the wood by Theodulf. And there were men with us who knew the paths well, whereof I was one. So we speedily came through into the open country. Shortly we came upon our folk and the Warduke lying at the foot of a little hill that went up as a buttress to a long ridge high above us, whereon we set a watch, and a little brook came down the dale for our drink. Night fell as we came thither, so we slept for a while, but abode not the morning, and we were afoot, for we had no horses with us, before the moon grew white. We took the road in good order, albeit our folk banners we had left behind in the burg. So each kindred raised aloft a shield of its token to be for a banner. So we went forth, and some swift footmen with Fox, who hath seen the Roman wargarth, had been sent on before to spy out the ways of the foemen. 2 hours after sunrise cometh one of these, and telleth how he hath seen the Romans, and how that they are but a short mile hence breaking their fast, not looking for any onslaught. But, saith he, they are on a high ridge whence they can see wide about, and be in no danger of ambush, because the place is bare for the most part, nor is there any cover except here and there down in the dales a few hazels and blackthorn bushes, and the rushes of the becks in the marshy bottoms, wherein a snipe may hide or a hare, but scarce a man. And note that there is no way up to that ridge but by a spur thereof as bare as my hand. So ye will be well seen as ye wend up thereto. So spake he in my hearing. But Theodulf bade him lead on to that spur, and old Heriulf, who was standing nigh, laughed merrily and said, Yea, lead on and speedily, lest the day wane and nothing done save the hunting of snipes. So on we went, and coming to the hither side of that spur beheld those others and Fox with them, and he held in his hand an arrow of the aliens, and his face was all astir with half-hidden laughter, and he breathed hard and pointed to the ridge, and somewhat low down on it we saw a steel cap and 3 spearheads showing white from out a little hollow in its side, but the men hidden by the hollow. So we knew that Fox had been chased, and that the Romans were warned and wary. No delay made the Warduke, but led us up that spur, which was somewhat steep, and as we rose higher we saw a band of men on the ridge, a little way down it, not a many. Archers and slingers mostly, who abode us till we were within shot, and then sent a few shots at us and so fled. But 2 men were hurt with the sling plummets, and one, and he not grievously, with an arrow and not one slain. Thus we came up onto the ridge, so that there was nothing between us and the bare heavens. Thence we looked southeast and saw the Romans wisely posted on the ridge not far from where it fell down steeply to the north. But on the south, that is to say on their left hands, and all along the ridge past where we were stayed, the ground sloped gently to the southwest for a good way, before it fell, somewhat steeply, into another long dale. Looking north we saw the outer edge of Mirkwood but a little way from us, and we were glad thereof, because ere we left our sleeping place that morn Theodulf had sent to Otter another messenger bidding him send yet more men on to us in case we should be hard-pressed in the battle, for he had had a late rumor that the Romans were many. And now when he had looked on the Roman array and noted how wise it was, he sent 3 swift-foot ones to take stand on a high knoll which we had passed on the way, that they might take heed where our folk came out from the wood and give signal to them by the horn, and lead them to where the battle should be. So we stood a while and breathed us, and handled our weapons some half a furlong from the alien host. They had no earth rampart around them, for that ridge is waterless, and they could not abide there long, but they had pitched sharp pales in front of them, and they stood in very good order, as if abiding an onslaught, and moved not when they saw us. For that band of shooters had joined themselves to them already. Taken one with another we deemed them to be more than we were. But their hauberked footmen with the heavy cast spears not so many as we by a good deal. Now we were of mind to fall on them ere they should fall on us. So all such of us as had shot weapons spread out from our company and went forth a little. And of the others Hiriolf stood foremost along with the leaders of the Beamings and the Elkerings. But as yet Theodulf held aback and led the midmost company, as his wont was, and the more part of the Wolfings were with him. Thus we ordered ourselves, and awaited a little while yet what the aliens should do, and presently a war-horn blew amongst them, and from each flank of their mailed footmen came forth a many bowmen and slingers and a band of horsemen, and drew within bowshot, the shooters in open array yet wisely, and so fell to on us, and the horsemen hung aback a little as yet. Their arrow-shot was of little avail, their bowmen fell fast before ours, but deadly was their sling-shot, and hurt and slew many and some even in our main battle. For they slung round leaden balls and not stones, and they aimed true and shot quick. And the men withal were so light and lithe, never still, but crouching and creeping and bounding here and there, that they were no easier to hit than Connies amidst of the fern, unless they were very nigh. Howbeit when this storm had endured a while, and we moved but little, and not an inch aback, and gave them shot for shot, then was another horn winded from amongst the aliens. And thereat the bowmen cast down their bows, and the slingers wound their slings about their heads, and they all came on with swords and short spears and feathered darts, running and leaping lustily, making for our flanks, and the horsemen set spurs to their horses and fell on in the very front of our folk like good and valiant men-at-arms. That saw Hiriolf and his men, and they set up the war-whoop and ran forth to meet them, axe and sword aloft, terribly yet maybe somewhat unwarily. The archers and slingers never came within sword-stroke of them, but fell away before them on all sides. But the slingers fled not far, but began again with their shot, and slew a many. Then was a horn winded, as if to call back the horsemen, who, if they heard, heeded not, but rode hard on our kindred like valiant warriors who feared not death. Sooth to say, neither were the horses big or good, nor the men fit for the work, saving for their hardihood. And their spears were short withal, and their bucklers unhandy to wield. Now could it be seen how the Goths gave way before them to let them into the trap, and then closed around again, and the axes and edge weapons went a work hewing as in a wood. And Hiriolf towered over all the press, and the wolf sister flashed over his head in the summer morning. Soon was that storm over, and we saw the Goths tossing up their spears over the slain, and horses running loose and masterless adown over the westward lying slopes, and a few with their riders still clinging to them. Yet some, sore hurt by seeming, galloping toward the main battle of the Romans. Unwarily then fared the children of Tyr that were with Hiriolf, for by this time they were well nigh within shot of the spears of those mighty footmen of the Romans. And on their flanks were the slingers and the bowmen, who had now gotten their bows again. And our bowmen, though they shot well and strong, were too few to quell them, and indeed some of them had cast by their bows to join in Hiriolf's storm. Also the lie of the ground was against us, for it sloped up toward the Roman array at first very gently, but afterwards steeply enough to breathe a short-winded man. Also behind them were we of the other kindreds, whom Theodulf had ordered into the wedge array, and we were all ready to move forward, so that had they abided somewhat, all had been well and better. So did they not, but straightway set up the victory whoop and ran forward on the Roman host. And these were so ordered that, as aforesaid, they had before them sharp piles stuck into the earth and pointed against us, as we found afterwards to our cost. And within these piles stood the men some way apart from each other, so as to handle their casting spears, and in 3 ranks were they ordered, and many spears could be cast at once, and if any in the front were slain, his fellow behind him took his place. So now the storm of war fell at once upon our folk, and swift and fierce as was their onslaught yet were a many slain and hurt or ever they came to the piles aforesaid. Then saw they death before them and heeded it not, but tore up the piles and dashed through them, and fell in on those valiant footmen. Short is the tale to tell. Wheresoever a sword or spear of the Goths was upraised there were 3 upon him, and Seth Todi of the Beamings, who was hurt and crawled away and yet lives, that on Hiriolf there were 6 at first and then more, and he took no thought of shielding himself, but raised up the wolf sister and hewed as the woodman in the thicket, when night cometh and hunger is on him. There fell Hiriolf the ancient and many a man of the Beamings and the Elkerings with him, and many a Roman. But amidst the slain and the hurt our wedge array moved forward slowly now, warily shielded against the plummets and shafts on either side. And when the Romans saw our unbroken array, and Theodulf the first with throng plough naked in his hand, they chased not such men of ours unhurt or little hurt, as drew aback from before them. So these we took amongst us, and when we had gotten all we might, and held a grim face to the foe, we drew aback little by little, still facing them till we were out of shot of their spears, though the shot of the arrows and the sling plummets ceased not wholly from us. Thus ended Hiriolf's storm. Then he rested from his speaking for a while, and none said aught, but they gazed on him as if he bore with him a picture of the battle, and many of the women wept silently for Hiriolf, and yet more of the younger ones were wounded to the heart when they thought of the young men of the Elkrings and the Beamings, since with both those houses they had affinity, and they lamented the loves that they had lost, and would have asked concerning their own speech friends had they durst. But they held their peace till the tale was told out to an end. Then Egil spake again. No long while had worn by in Hiriolf's storm, and though men's hearts were nothing daunted, but rather angered by what had befallen, yet would Theodulf wear away the time somewhat more, since he hoped for succor from the Wainburg and the wood, and he would not that any of these Romans should escape us, but would give them all to Tyr, and to be a following to Hiriolf the old and the great. So there we abided a while moving not, and Theodulf stood with throng plough on his shoulder, unhelmed, unburned, as though he trusted to the kindred for all defence. Nor for their part did the Romans dare to leave their vantage ground, when they beheld what grim countenance we made them. Albeit, when we had thrice made as if we would fall on, and yet they moved not, whereas it trieth a man sorely to stand long before the foeman, and do not but endure, and whereas many of our bowmen were slain or hurt, and the rest too few to make head against the shot weapons of the aliens, then at last we began to draw nearer and a little nearer, not breaking the wedge array. And at last, just before we were within shot of the cast spears of their main battle, loud roared our war horn. Then, indeed, we broke the wedge array, but orderly as we knew how, spreading out from right and left of the Warduke till we were facing them in a long line. 1 minute we abode thus, and then ran forth through the spear storm, and even therewith we heard, as it were, the echo of our own horn, and whoso had time to think betwixt the first of the storm and the handstrokes of the Romans deemed that now would be coming fresh kindreds for our helping. Not long endured the spear rain, so swift we were, neither were we in one throng as betid in Hiriolf's storm, but spread abroad, each trusting in the other that none thought of the backward way. Though we had the ground against us, we dashed like fresh men at their pails, and were under the weapons at once. Then was the battle grim. They could not thrust us back, nor did we break their array with our first storm. Man hewed at man as if there were no foes in the world but they two. Sword met sword and sax met sax. It was thrusting and hewing with point and edge, and no long-shafted weapons were of any avail. There we fought hand to hand, and no man knew by eyesight how the battle went 2 yards from where he fought, and each one put all his heart in the stroke he was then striking, and thought of nothing else. Yet at the last we felt that they were faltering and that our work was easier and our hope higher. Then we cried our cries and pressed on harder. And in that very nick of time there arose close behind us the roar of the markman's horn and the cries of the kindreds answering ours. Then such of the Romans as were not in the very act of smiting or thrusting, or clinging or shielding, turned and fled, and the whoop of victory rang around us, and the earth shook, and past the place of the slaughter rushed the riders of the Goths. For they had sent horsemen to us, and the paths were grown easier for our much treading of them. Then I beheld Theodulf, that he had just slain a foe, and clear was the space around him, and he rushed sideways and caught hold of the stirrup of Angantyr of the Bearings, and ran 10 strides beside him, and then bounded on a foot swifter than the red horses of the Bearings, urging on the chase as his wont was. But we who were wearier when we had done our work, stood still between the living and the dead, between the freemen of the mark and their war thralls. And in no long while there came back to us Theodulf and the chasers, and we made a great ring on the field of the slain, and sang the song of triumph, and it was the Wolfings song that we sang. Thus then ended Theodulf's storm. When he held his peace there was but little noise among the stay-at-homes, for still were they thinking about the deaths of their kindred and their lovers. But Egil spoke again. Yet within that ring lay the sorrow of our hearts, for Odin had called a many home, and there lay their bodies, and the mightiest was Hiriolf, and the Romans had taken him up from where he fell, and cast him down out of the way, but they had not stripped him, and his hand still gripped the wolf's sister. His shield was full of shafts of arrows and spears. His byrnie was rent in many places, his helm battered out of form. He had been grievously hurt in the side and in the thigh by cast spears or ever he came to hand blows with the Romans, but moreover he had 3 great wounds from the point of the sax, in the throat, in the side, in the belly, each enough for his bane. His face was yet fair to look on, and we deemed that he had died smiling. At his feet lay a young man of the beamings in a gay green coat, and beside him was the head of another of his house, but his green-clad body lay some yards aloof. There lay of the Elkings a many. Well may ye weep, maidens, for them that loved you. Now fare they to the gods a goodly company, but a goodly company is with them. 77 of the sons of the Goths lay dead within the Roman battle, and 54 on the slope before it. And to boot there were 24 of us slain by the arrows and plummets of the shooters, and a many hurt withal. But there were no hurt men inside the Roman array or before it. All were slain outright, for the hurt men either dragged themselves back to our folk, or onward to the Roman ranks, that they might die with one more stroke smitten. Now of the aliens the dead lay in heaps in that place, for grim was the slaughter when the riders of the bearings and the wormings fell on the aliens, and a many of the foemen scorned to flee, but died where they stood, craving no peace, and to few of them was peace given. There fell of the Roman footmen 585, and the remnant that fled was but little. But of the slingers and bowmen but 86 were slain, for they were there to shoot and not to stand. And they were nimble and fleet of foot, men round of limb, very dark-skinned, but not foul of favor. Then he said, There are men through the dusk of faring, our speech fiends and our kin, no more shall they crave our helping, nor ask what work to win. They have done their deeds and departed when they had holpen the house, so high their heads are holden, and their hurts are glorious with the story of strokes stricken, and new weapons to be met, and new scowling of foes' faces, and new curses unknown yet. Lo, they dight the feast in God home, and fair are the tables spread, late come, but well-beloved is every war-worn head, and the godfolk and the fathers, as these cross the tinkling bridge, crowd round and crave for stories of the battle on the ridge. Therewith he came down from the speech hill, and the womenfolk came round about him, and they brought him to the hall and washed him and gave him meat and drink, and then would he sleep, for he was weary. Howbeit some of the women could not refrain themselves, but must needs ask after their speech friends who had been in the battle. And he answered as he could, and some he made glad and some sorry. And as to some, he could not tell them whether their friends were alive or dead. So he went to his place and fell asleep and slept long, while the women went down to acre and meadow, or saw to the baking of bread or the sewing of garments, or went far afield to tend the neat and the sheep. Howbeit the hall son went not with them. But she talked with that old warrior sorely, who was now halt and grown unmeet for the road, but was a wise man. And she and he together with some old carlines and a few young lads fell to work, and saw to many matters about the hall and the garth that day. And they got together what weapons there were both for shot and for the handplay, and laid them where they were handy to come at, and they saw to the meal in the hall that there was provision for many days, and they carried up to a loft above the women's chamber many great vessels of water, lest the fire should take the hall. And they looked everywhere to the entrances and windows, and had fastenings and bolts and bars fashioned and fitted to them, and saw that all things were trim and stout. And so they abided the issue.